Is there a is there a sense amongst you all that we are actually at a potentially important turning point anyway? That because of levels of indebtedness, our inability to create enough wealth in the West, and so on, there is going to have to be a radically different settlement, and therefore this is an opportunity for people on the right, as for people on the left, to kind of pile in and start to make some more.
Well, it's certainly at a moment of, I think, permanent national decline. I think that a lot of people have until recently viewed the current crisis as a temporary thing which will come to an end, like the one we had in the 1980s, and then we'll all get back to being prosperous again. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to be comparatively less well off, comparatively less powerful, comparatively less almost everything, which may concentrate people's minds. But on the other hand, I think one has also to look at the fact that there's been a huge ideological victory of liberalism and of what I style cultural Marxism as a way of simply lumping together all the forces of, for instance, political correctness, anti-family, multiculturalism, which have taken over almost all discourse in this country, which make it very, very difficult to combat these things, because the platform from which you could once have done it, a conservative platform of a sovereign independent nation with working institutions and traditions, has almost completely been wiped out. And both the main political parties have also been taken over by neoliberalism in internal putches. So there's almost no room, particularly in the Conservative Party, for any genuine conservative discourse.
If I can say, the reason why we're at such a juncture, in my opinion, is why this matters, is because, among other things, there is a risk at the moment that people will rely on the idea that the only thing that has got us where we are is, for instance, Fred Goodwin. The only thing that has got us where we are a few bankers and so on. And whilst the catastrophe within the banking sector is undoubtedly a factor, we will not get through this period if we do not also recognise the fact that government without the banking bailout has been so vastly overspending that it is unsustainable anyway. If you are borrowing, as we have already this fiscal year, more than 100 billion without anything to do with the banking bailout, that should be a warning something is going wrong in your spending.
But the origin of that, this is so important, I have to push in here, the origin of that is not just a decision to spend lots more money. The origin of it was the decision in the 1960s that the state should become the parent,
yes,
that more and more people should be married to the state, that the family should become less and less important. And the reason why we have such a huge number of people dependent upon the welfare state is this deliberate decision to create, and now to continue to creating endlessly, fatherless families which the state is responsible for. That's the reason why the entire product of the income tax is now spent on welfare.
I think that was a wince, Margot James, rather than a nod.
Well, I think it is a perverse way of looking at the world to allege that these negative social consequences have been all at the door of government policy, as if there is a political party or a government that is trying to create fatherless families. Absolutely not. And I think that the roots of the problem are much more diverse than government policy. There have been a lot of social change, and this government is trying, through welfare reform, to address some of the problems.
Thomas Frank, how would this conversation feel if it was happening in America? Is there more pessimism in British conservatism than you hear in American conservatism?
Oh, absolutely. But look, the turning point you referred to a minute ago, America hit that turning point and just didn't turn. Okay, the turning point is basically the complete destruction of 30 years of economic policy. All the financial deregulation, the desupervision, all of the ways in which we encouraged financial experimentation. That's been our economic policy in America for 30 years. At the expense of places like where I grew up, which is now referred to as the Rust Belt. Okay, and this economic policy completely crashes and burns in 2008. It's revealed to be absolutely worthless. And what do? We bail out the banks, set them back up, make sure these guys get their bonuses, set them back up and get them started again. And this is both parties accept this policy. Okay, for the Republicans engineer it at first, President Bush. And then President Obama comes in and accepts this. You referred earlier to sort of class outrage, the sense of outrage at the billionaire class. That is palpable in America. It is everywhere you go in America. What's fascinating to me is that the conservative movement in America are the ones that speak to that most ably and most effectively. And that's one of the reasons that they've succeeded and why the Tea Party movement is succeeding. You go watch Newt Gingrich when, this is, who this guy is. He's running for president. And he gave a victory speech after his big win in South Carolina the other day. And I swear he mentioned elites or elitism 5 or 6 times in the course of his talk. I mean, this is the Tea Party movement imagines itself to be the great sort of rising up of the masses against the.
It's true. It's very hard to come up with a definition of elite that doesn't include Newt Gingrich.
I'm it, right? In his mind, it's like the starving journalist.
But this is just rank populism of the kind that's popular in both our countries at the moment and at risk of getting worse.
Tom's talking about the Tea Party. That goes back. The Americans' dislike of big government is visceral, isn't it? And it goes right back to the origins of the United States and the tussle between the states and the federal government. And I think there's a parallel between in the US, this dislike of big government, and in the UK, this deep concern about the European Union and Brussels. That is the sort of whipping boy for all of our discontent, in the same way as big government and federal government is for the discontent of the Tea Party movement.
I want to see whether we can connect what's happened economically. The disemboweling, if you like, of traditional manufacturing, of a lot of things that used to go on in this country in favour of financial services, financial engineering, not real engineering, and what, for instance, Peter was saying about the family and traditional structures, because it seems to a lot of people that what has happened over the last 20 years is, in effect, governments of either stripe have taken the huge tax take that was on offer during the long boom in the city and used it to buy off people through welfare and bigger state spending, and therefore have not confronted the industrial and economic problems, which were where so many people and families and breadwinners were traditionally employed.
Well, this is true, and I think if you look at both, this is one of the great mistakes which modern Conservatives make is this what I call Thatcherolatry in this country, and of course the ludicrous worship of Ronald Reagan in the United States. These were economically profoundly liberal governments. They forsook all kinds of protection. They exposed their native industries to the most disastrous competition and basically did huge damage to manufacturing industry and therefore to the livelihoods of people. And again, this hits straight at the family. In the areas where people used to work in manufacturing industry and support their families through work, you now have vast welfare deserts. And these were the creation of supposedly much worshipped conservative governments. And this is part of the huge mess that conservatism has got itself into. I must just respond to Margot on the business of fatherless families. There was actually a big ideological battle about this in the 1960s. In which the whole idea of the unmarried mother was changed into the single parent. And then there was an ideological battle in her own party during the long years of opposition in Blairism, when there was a moment where I think it was David Willetts who declared that the war on the single mother is over. There'd never been a war against single mothers. Nobody disliked single mothers. That wasn't the point. What there ought to have been was a war to re-establish the father-led family and the independence of the family from the state, if it had been a Conservative party. But by that time, it was a wholly neoliberal party, which in my view would guillotine the Queen in Trafalgar Square if it thought it would win it an election.
Can I just come in? I think there was, Peter forgets, there was a huge social stigma about being a single mother. In the 70s, and even before that it was even worse. Very, very difficult to become a single mother. In the 60s, young women who were pregnant outside marriage were forced to give up their children for adoption with terrible consequences. And then in the 70s, yes, it was just about acceptable to have the baby, but you were shunned.
Your father was
stigma.
adopted, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. My partner is adopted.
Your partner's adopted.
Not my father. No.
Sorry.
No.
In fact, there was an awful lot of work going on in a book which I won't mention because this isn't a plugging program, which I wrote more than 10 years ago. I went into this business. There was an awful lot going on previously to try and alleviate the unpleasant things which were done to unmarried mothers. But that switched into a campaign to make single parenthood acceptable as a social thing, which has changed our country in such an enormous way that it is now almost unrecognisable. There are two different things. Treating people well and the social movement are two very different things.
I want to bring in Thomas Frank at this point because not that long ago, from our perspective, the American popular right was very interested in social issues.
That's right.
Abortion, the death penalty, all sorts of kind of, if you like, touchstone moral issues. and yet the Tea Party today is interested primarily and almost universally in economics, shrinking the state, in tax issues. Why has that change happened?
Well, I mean, you've got this economic slump that just won't end, and that has a tendency to push culture war issues off the front burner. The same thing happened in the 1930s. I mean, America has periodically been convulsed with culture wars. In the 1920s, we had, it was the rise of fundamentalism, and then you had Prohibition, which was, this great moment and shining moment in the history of my land. And then in the 1930s, with the Depression, people forgot about that stuff as, they wanted to get rid of it as quickly as they could. And that's what happens. In moments of hard times, the culture wars disappear. But that doesn't, and that's what's going on right now. Now, they'll be back, of course. The culture wars will be back as soon as the economy recovers. But this doesn't mean, and like you say, economic issues are the focus again. But this doesn't mean that we talk about economic issues in an economic way. We think about them, especially on the right. The Tea Party movement and their allies. We think about them in moral terms. In almost religious terms. Okay, we think about the national debt instead of the way an economist would think about it. We think about it as though it were the doings of a family, or we think about it in terms of 7 lean years and 7 fat years, like in the Bible. We think about Ron Paul's son Rand Paul, who's a U.S. senator from Kentucky, talks about the day of judgment that's coming to us.
Well, we may be getting 7 lean years after rather more than 7 fat years. I'm not sure the Bible's wrong on that one. Can I just bring in Douglas Murray, because in your vision of neoconservatism, you would like to slash the state right back. You'd like to cut taxes back much more radically to create a more individualistic and less state-dependent society. Are you looking at what the Conservative government is doing now? Are you just purely a voice out there in the wilderness, or do you have connections with the Conservative family which actually starts to put some of your ideas into practice?
I wouldn't want to harm the career of anyone by naming names in the Conservative Party of anyone who sympathises with what I think, but I think that I think to an extent all Conservative voices, the small c, neocon, paleocon, whatever, are to an extent in the wilderness at the moment, because we have found ourselves in a slightly similar situation to that which the States has been in for some years, which is to say that the battles have become phony battles. In the States, the argument about abortion, Roe versus Wade, all the time. In fact, Republican or Democrat, extremely unlikely that the abortion laws are going to change in the US. These things are fought incredibly hard, but they're actually diversionary conflicts. And in the meantime, all sorts of other things go through without anyone batting an eyelid. Again, an example of the war on single mothers. The phantom culture wars fought, whilst the real things go through unnoticed. And I think there's one, if I can say so, very good battle going on at the moment that's a real battle, and that's the one that the coalition government is involved in over whether or not you should be paid better if you work than if you don't work. And the extraordinary conflict, apart from anything else, in the House of Lords that has come across...
We should remind people, this is the £26,000 cap, which is the maximum that a family on benefits can receive, because it is the average wage.
And this is already being talked about in entirely sentimental terms. Here is a family with 5 children who've got £30,000 a year on benefits, and therefore they will not be able to live the life they would like. The BBC did something on such a family the other day. And this diverts from the real issue, which is the terrible disincentive and the terrible disaster across society that occurs when you do not incentivize people to work, to get out there, to find, apart from anything else, nobility in providing for their dependents.
What would your welfare state look like?
It would be a safety net. It would be what the welfare state was always meant to be, or should have been, in my opinion, which is that it was a safety net that caught those in need, but that didn't become a smothering safety blanket that ended up in sending us into the situation we're currently in, where you have generation after generation of families who have not only never known work, but have never known that they ought to know work.